Liebe portugiesische Gäste, dear friends from Portugal, liebe Gäste aus Leipzig, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, liebe Patricia Severino, ich begrüße Sie ganz herzlich heute hier zu unserem portugiesischen Abend. Ich muss das nicht erklären, wir haben wilde Zeiten und wir haben trotzdem dafür gekämpft, dass unser Gastland Portugal, Gastland der Leipziger Buchmesse 2022 jetzt schon in diesem Jahr mit portugiesischen Autorinnen und Autoren in Leipzig startet. Ich bin sehr froh, dass wir Elena Witzek und Holger Heimann gewinnen konnten, mit uns diese Veranstaltung heute hier im Haus des Buches durchzuführen und dass wir überhaupt Publikum in die Veranstaltung lassen können. Es ist alles mit der heißen Nadel und trotzdem freuen wir uns auf diese Begegnung. Freuen Sie sich mit mir gemeinsam jetzt auf 4 Autorinnen und Autoren aus Portugal und am Ende der Veranstaltung müssen Sie mir noch erklären, wie Sie es eigentlich geschafft haben, aus Portugal hierher zu kommen. Das ist dann aber eine andere Frage. Okay, dann gebe ich jetzt das Mikrofon an die beiden ModeratorInnen.
Ja, vielen Dank für die kurze Einführung. Ich hoffe, ich bin zu hören. Wir freuen uns auch ungemein, heute hier zu sein in dieser Konstellation. Es ist ja wirklich auch was ganz Besonderes jetzt in dieser Zeit. Wir freuen uns über alle Zuschauer und Zuhörer. Und vielleicht vorab kurz zum Ablauf. Wir sprechen jetzt, es gibt 2 Gespräche heute Abend. Wir stellen zunächst die Autorinnen und Autoren vor, das wird auf Deutsch stattfinden und anschließend switchen wir ins Englische. Das Gespräch wird auf Englisch stattfinden und dann schauen wir, was wir sonst noch an Sprachkonfusion im Laufe dieses Abends erzeugen. Dann Holger.
Dann fange ich an. Hier mir zur Rechten sitzt Isabella Figueiredo, die ist 1963 in Mosambik geboren, im heutigen Maputo. Sie ist dort aufgewachsen und kam dann 1975 nach Portugal, in ein Land, was ihr ganz und gar fremd war, wo sie nicht aufgewachsen ist. Und sie kam dahin ohne ihre Eltern, was nochmal eine besondere Schwierigkeit war, wie man sich vorstellen kann. Sie hat über die Zeit in Afrika, wie sie die erlebt hat, und über die Zeit in Portugal, über die Rückkehr, 2 Bücher geschrieben, die beide ins Deutsche übersetzt sind und die beide auch in Portugal für Furore gesorgt haben. Das erste, ich halte hier mal in die Kamera, das erste Buch ist Roter Staub, das setzt sich mit den Afrika-Erfahrungen auseinander. Das ist auf Deutsch vor 2 Jahren erschienen. Und das zweite Buch, das ist ganz frisch, das heißt Die Dicke, und vor allen Dingen über dieses Buch wollen wir reden. Herzlich willkommen, Isabella, welcome.
So, neben mir sitzt Afonso Reis Cabral. Er ist 1990 geboren und hat beneidenswert früh angefangen zu schreiben. Sein erstes Buch, O meu irmão, mein Bruder, ist schon relativ früh erschienen. Sein zweites Buch ist jetzt auf Deutsch erschienen, bei Hansa. Pão de Açúcar heißt es auf Englisch und auf Portugiesisch. Und für dieses Buch hat er den Saramago-Preis gewonnen. Das ist der wichtigste portugiesische Literaturpreis. Und als wir letztes Jahr in Lissabon waren, da haben wir uns kennengelernt, hat er uns erzählt, dass er eine Reise in Portugal hinter sich hat. Da ist er durch Portugal gewandert, mehrere 100 Kilometer, wenn ich es richtig in Erinnerung habe, und hat sich selbst ein bisschen besser kennengelernt, aber auch seine Landsleute. Und auch daraus ist ein Buch entstanden. Welcome, Afonso.
Thank you very much.
And also welcome, Isabella. So we were wondering, did the two of you ever meet before? Did you have the opportunity to see each other before?
No, we met yesterday at the train coming
Okay.
to Leipzig. So
By accident? Was it?
no, we had the same trip
Okay.
to Leipzig, but I've never met Isabella until yesterday.
Okay. And I suppose you both know each other's works. If you had to find one similarity in your writing, what would that be?
That's difficult to answer, I believe, but perhaps the day-to-day life that Isabella finds, at least in Agorda. I think that's a common theme in our work, probably. I try to find day-to-day themes that suddenly are more important than day-to-day life. So Probably, but I'm not sure.
Okay, and what would you guess, Isabella?
Is that my microphone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I agree with you. I think that reality, things that are happening and are important for our world right now, are important for us. And this is a common thing that we have.
You have also one wonderful thing that's that I recognize myself in it, the concrete things of daily life, but also the streets, the Almada.
Yes.
So I also like to take a reality and to put it on my work.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Because when you wrote about Gisbert,
the case. Yeah.
when you wrote, I thought it was a matter that I would like to write
Yeah.
about.
Okay.
Isabella, as I mentioned in the introduction, you grew up in Mozambique and
Yes.
you came to Portugal in 1975, and it was a completely...
Yes, fine.
I remember right, and it was a completely foreign country for you. How was that as you came there?
Well, it was like arriving to Germany for me when I arrived to Portugal in 1975. It was really a different country. It was a very backward country. I didn't know what was to be Portuguese. I didn't feel Portuguese at the time. I thought I was a Mozambican girl. My parents were Portuguese, and I spoke Portuguese all of my life, but in a different context. It was a different world. I was living like not a Portuguese life. When I arrived to Portugal, Portugal was really, it was an old country, and I used to live in a very modern country because Mozambique was very developed and very modern.
That sounds surprising.
Yes, but it was like that. In Portugal, in Mozambique, we have a very good lifestyle because of because of the situation of my father and everybody living there. Every Portuguese people living there, they lived well. They have good jobs and they could have good money. So, and it was not the same in Portugal. So I began with a very good context, and when I arrived to Portugal, it was different. It was a poor country, so it was very difficult in the beginning.
Together with you, more than 500,000 Portuguese people, the so-called retornados, came back to Portugal from the former colonies from Angola and Mozambique. How was their life when they arrived in Portugal and later?
They arrived with nothing at all. They arrived at the airport with the clothes they have dressed, and with nothing at all. And it was quite unfair for them, for us, the way we were received in Portugal, because we were coming from a situation of violence and war. Because with the Portuguese Revolution, the former Portuguese colonies were independent, and Portuguese were not welcomed there. And we have done a lot of bad things there. You can imagine, as people with power, we have mistreated many African people. So there were a lot of revenges, and we Portuguese, guilty or non-guilty, we were victims of that revenges. So we were escaping from that. We are full of fear, and we have lost everything: houses, cars, everything. So that good life that we were used to to have, we lost it. So we were escaping from it. And when we arrived to Portugal, of course, Portuguese people mistreated us because we were the bad ones. We were the ones that have exploited and were not welcome there.
How did that experience as a retornada influenced you and your life, perhaps until today?
A lot. I still feel rejected. I still don't feel that I belong to anywhere. I don't belong to Mozambique, but I still don't belong to Portugal either. And I don't feel that I have a place. I feel apart, and it's something that I have to live with. I know that I have to live with.
Afonso, since you were born in 1990, I was wondering how the memory of the colonial past influenced your childhood.
Well, it's a completely different experience of it. My dad went to the colonial war. He was a captain there, so I had an idea of it, a different idea, because I am the second generation. I never lived in Africa, I never been there even. But my dad used to tell us stories, to talk about Africa, about Angola, not Mozambique, but about Angola. To me it's like a historic event. I don't have personal or grudge or personal involvement in it. So it's like talking about the French invasions in the beginning of the 19th century. I know it was just 15 or 20 years before my time, but it's as historical as any other subject in Portuguese history.
So what would you say was the most important political or social influence on your childhood then?
I didn't have a political education in that sense, much more a literary one. I know the two things come together in a way, but I was brought up in democracy, so democracy is a fact. It's not something that I have to work or I had to work to have. Not characters, not persons. That's important to me to say and to reiterate. So they are growing up, they are finding themselves, the book in a way, in some sense, is a coming of age book, but also a psychological study. And of course there's that kind of masculinity, and particularly within the group. They themselves alone don't think about it. For instance, Samuel, one of the characters, knew already Gisberta, and in no moment at all he thinks of her like confronting his own masculinity. But Rafa does. So there's plenty of mindsets. There's plenty of confront there.
Isabella, question to you. I think we almost all have pictures of ideal bodies in our mind, forced by advertisement. From my point of view,
I didn't understand, sorry.
We have pictures from ideal bodies in our mind. Yes. And from my point of view, your novel is a protest against this norm, against this picture. So I would like to ask you, how was the reaction of the public in Portugal when your novel came out? How did the people read it? Were they shocked or?
No. Yes. First, in the beginning, I remember that someone I invited to present the book refused it. Because she considered that I was insulting her by inviting her to speak about fatness.
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
journalist, a Portuguese journalist, which is a fat woman, and I admire her. And I decided that I wanted to listen to what she has to say about it, because as a fat woman, all of my life I felt rejected. I felt that I was almost a ghost. Nobody looks at me. I was unseen. So I wanted to speak about other people about this feeling. And I decided to invite her, and she's very well known in Portugal. And she really answered like an insulted person. I don't want to speak about it. I'm not fat at all. Of course she's a little bit fat, and what's the problem? Let's speak about it. But she didn't want, so me and my publisher, we decided to present the book speaking with each other, because she refused it. So it was a little bit shocking in the beginning, but nowadays I think that people is speaking more about it. But in Portugal, everything is being falado,
Talked
about
yeah.
right now. We are talking about everything, every difficult issues right now.
So if I may put a question to you too. Do you have the feeling that the concept of the perfect female body is changing also in Portugal?
The
The concept of the perfect female body, like when you look at advertisements also on...
No, I think that the idea that bodies have not to be the same is talked about right now, but the concept didn't change. And I don't know if the concept will ever change. But now we have a speech, there is a speech. There is a speech about it.
There's a concern about
And
it. Yeah.
yes, and not before. We are speaking about it. We are saying sentences like, we don't have to be the same. Our body is not conceived. We were not born to be equal. Equal in our body should not.
Yeah, but that helps already,
Yes,
does it?
yes. It's a beginning.
And there's some plus size models, I believe.
Yes.
So
yes.
that
Yes.
probably helps a bit. Yeah.
Isabella, as far as I know, it's your most successful book in Portugal, or that means there's an audience for that topic. The Agorda.
Yes, it sells better than Rotterstob. If you mean success by selling.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Okay. In Portugal, it's my most successful book. Yes.
Okay. I think we have to end already. We wanted to ask you both as a final question if you have the feeling that in Portugal and Europe, the public has to find a new way of dealing with minorities' rights and marginalized groups.
Well, it's being talked about every day, I believe. So probably that's the way. That's the way. Yeah.
I think we are beginning our time of talk about difficult issues. We are beginning to do it. Last 5 years, we are speaking a lot about race, about gender, about abuse, about body, about everything. And nowadays it's an everyday issue. So we are beginning to do it, and I think that next times these issues will be really treated, spoken.
Okay, I think that's a nice ending.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the conversation. We could have spoken much longer, but unfortunately.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for the organization and everything. It must have been very difficult to manage everything, so thank you very much.
So then we make a change and ask the next couple to come here on stage, please.
Or is there a break?
Thank you.
Okay. Can we go on already? Great. Also so nochmal kurz auf Deutsch. Neben mir sitzt Patricia Portela. Sie studierte Kostümdesign in Lissabon und Utrecht, Film in Dänemark, Philosophie in Belgien. Sie ist Performance-Künstlerin und Schriftstellerin, schreibt auch Theaterstücke. Und sie hat eine literarische Residenz in Berlin hinter sich. Welcome, Patricia.
Ja. Und mir zur Seite sitzt José Luis Peixoto. Er wurde 1974 geboren, ist in einem kleinen Dorf in Alentejo, einer der ärmsten Regionen Portugals, noch heute aufgewachsen. Er ist Schriftsteller geworden, deswegen sitzt er hier, aber das war am Anfang gar nicht so ganz klar. Also eine Karriere als Musiker war durchaus im Bereich des Möglichen. Er hat nämlich in einer Punkband gespielt, noch als Teenager, und später dann ist er mit der sehr bekannt gewordenen Heavy-Metal-Band Moonspell aufgetreten. Aber die Musik wurde es dann doch nicht. Wir reden da gleich noch drüber, warum vielleicht. Sprechen möchte ich heute mit ihm vor allem über dieses Buch, Galveias, das heißt so eben wie das Dorf im Alentejo, in dem er groß geworden ist. Über dieses Buch hat er diesen Roman geschrieben. Ich freue mich, dass er hier ist. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we figured you were both born in 1974, which is a very important year for Portugal. Do you have the feeling that there's something that connects people of that age at that time, what you experienced? That's a question to both of you.
Yes. First of all, thank you for this invitation. It's very nice to be here and talking amongst fellow writers that I admire. And I was not only born, I didn't know you were from 74, but now I'm going to say, not only in 74, I was born on the 16th of March, which is the first attempt of the revolution. But I was not there yet, and then I needed to. From when are you?
4th of September.
Ah, much later. So there is a difference. But it's true, we always call, our generation is often called the children of April. And it's kind of, it's a mixed feeling. On one hand, I mean, and you can contradict that, but it's on one hand, it's like we have a legacy, because our parents somehow made the revolution, one way or the other. On the other hand, for a very long time, at least in my family, my father's from Alentejo, which is a very important part of the country, and it has a big history in this revolution, making of this revolution. For a very long time, we couldn't do anything that could be shocking or revolutionary or important, because our parents did it all. So there was this generation gap with parents that made revolutions is not evident, and so it's a very beautiful generation to be part of.
Well, I'm actually very proud of being born in September because I was born in democracy. Everybody always asks in Portugal, where were you on the 25th of April? I was in my mother's belly. And I was born in September. I agree with Patricia. It's a very charismatic year to be born, and I know a lot of people that was born in that year, and there is kind of, among us, we say, 74.
Yes, it's kind of a club.
It's a specific year to be born in Portugal, because, of course, 1974, specifically 25th of April 1974, is the most important day in Portuguese history in the last, I don't know.
47 years?
No, at least, I don't know, in the last 100 years probably. For sure, it's the most important day in the second half of the 20th century in Portugal, and it marks a change that is very deep in recent Portuguese history. And for us, that we were born on that year, so we grew listening to all the things that we missed, and that is very that is something that is a mark that we have as someone that was born in that year.
And what did that make with you? How did you
How did I
react
deal
on
with
it?
that?
Yeah.
Well, I wrote several books about before 74. I feel that was a way of trying to catch up a bit with all the things that I had missed, because we heard that you did not live the colonial war, you did not live the censorship, you did not live, I don't know, so many things. But I mean, now I'm 46, I have lived a few things also. and I feel that we are coming to terms with all of this. It was very interesting to listen to Isabella and Afonso. And Afonso, that was born in 1990. We have strong memories of that year. We were grown up already. But it's interesting because I feel that there are a number of Portuguese issues that were a bit unsolved, and that we as a country are trying to come to terms with those things, like this question, this subject related to the colonies or other things from our past. And I feel that these generations, they have a different view from, if you compare it with the previous generations that lived it and that are still very traumatized in a way, even though almost 50 years have passed.
José, you grew up in that small village in Galveias in Alentejo. I said that in the introduction. How do you remember your childhood?
Well, I feel that it's interesting because I feel that my childhood has a lot to do with what we were talking about. Because, of course, I was born in this small village of 1,000 people, but I understood that you mentioned punk and you mentioned heavy metal. And I feel that that is something that was only possible after the 25th of April and on the world that we grew up in. Because even though I was living in this small village with shepherds and with all kinds of rural pictures, there was also a urban side, and because after 74, one thing that changed in Portugal, it was not only the political system, but also the access we had to the rest of the world. Exactly. Because only after 74 was Coca-Cola available in Portugal. I mean, that is symbolic, right? And so, of course, I had that side of living there, of having a lot of friends that were children and they were working, for example, of having that reality of rurality. But at the same time, I was imagining the whole world. I was imagining, Germany, for example. I was imagining things that were now available and that were a discovery for me specifically, but I believe for the whole country.
Yeah, I think what... Can I?
Yeah, I would like to know
what
about you.
José Luís Peixoto is saying is important, because we're the first generation that can travel, that can go out, that can also... I remember seeing the first performances, for example, and films from abroad and from other places, and we're the first generation that has the chance to do it on a kind of very regular basis. So it was not something that only very few people could afford to do, but we could go out into the world. And that makes a huge difference. And also, we're the children of a promise. I mean, my parents, they were going to change the world. So I grew up in that environment, and that's very strong. It's sometimes when I think about this year that what passed, and I have a child who's 12, And I mean, I was completely, and I think it's the same for José Luís Peixoto, which is we breathed, we absorbed a whole system. For example, I really have very strong memories from being really small, and this idea of cultural schools, and the parents were involved in everything, were building everything. We were really going to be the best people in the world, and I think that really has a huge impact on you, not only in the skepticism and sadness and disappointment that you also feel in the generation of my parents, but also in a lot of people, but also in this responsibility that I think I was listening to José Luís saying, and I think it's also, we feel like the carriers of that promise in a way, and we feel like you have to continue. I thought it was very beautiful what José Luís said, that where was I in the 25th of April? I was in the belly of my mother. I'm this generation. I was 1 month old when the 25th of April took place, and a week later there was the 1st of May, and it was a huge the first huge demonstration. I'm from Lisbon, so I was born in Lisbon, and there was a very famous actor and director called Mário Viegas, a very important personality also in our country, who used to joke that said that we're the generation that fell from our parents' shoulders in the first demonstrations in the country, and that's why we're all a bit confused about our future, because we were the ones that were taken everywhere. And I think it's also something that I remember very well from my childhood, like everything was allowed all of a sudden. My mother, a few months before, could not wear trousers, could not smoke. I mean, we're talking about details, of course, but they were...
Those are very strong details.
But they were the image of what you were not allowed to do. And I was born and I was raised in a idea of freedom. And that's very important because it's very strong.
It's very interesting what you're telling. I was just thinking, maybe it's a bit comparable for us, like to the breaking down of the wall. And later on, we as children or young people maybe had the feeling, or some of us had the feeling, that nothing really interesting or really crazy could still happen in our life. And yeah, apparently you had the same experience a little bit.
I have a story I would love to write about once, which is actually based on a friend of mine who's 18 years older than me. So he was 18 when there was the revolution, and actually when there was the Berlin Wall, he ran just to smell and feel again the same feeling, because he said, once you're 18, you leave 74, 75, and then you're like going like, oh, where did it all go? And then when there was the wall, he just took a backpack 10 years later, 15 years later, and went to run after the dream in a way. And we saw it again in 1999 with what happened with East Timor. I don't know if you know it, but also there was a referendum, and I think 78% of the population voted to be free and independent in East Timor. And once the results came out, almost a third of the population there was a massacre going on just right after. And everybody came out on the streets in Portugal. It was, not only in Portugal, but in Portugal it was a very big issue, of course, because of what Isabella and Afonso were also talking about all the wounds and all the scars and all the guilt and everything that we still have to work on and about. But what was nice was I remember being in demonstrations with my grandfather, and remember also my grandfather saying, oh, finally, it's been a long time since I've been in a real demonstration. So it's there, we have it, all of us, this possibility of change. And change is a matter of being punctual, isn't it? But being at the same time, at the same place, with an agenda, all together. So it's there, but sometimes it feels like we had the same a year ago. Like the world could have changed, and now we're just wanting to run after keeping it exactly as bad as it was. So it's there.
José, your book is situated in 1984, your novel. That means 10 years after the revolution. Why did you decide for that year in special?
Well, it was not because of Orwell. I know that 1984 is a very strong year in literature because of Orwell, but in fact it was not. I just thought that in 1984 I was 10 years old. Actually, what we are talking here about is relationship between literature and history. And I think that even if we write science fiction or if we write historical novels, we cannot escape from our historical point of view. I mean, and in 1984 I was 10 years old, and also so I had already some idea of what surrounded me and the world, and that was important to write that novel. But also I wanted to write this novel about a village that was like an example. I mean, this village is very specific. It has the name of the place where I was born, but at the same time I have this ambition that it can be understood as some other village somewhere else. And in 1984, Portugal was already not so much under the influence of 1974, because if the novel was placed in 78 or in 79 or 81, it had to be mentioned, that historical specificity. And also it was before Portugal getting in European Union, which has also changed a lot Portugal, and especially the interior of Portugal. So I wanted this moment that was historically neutral in a certain way. It was not, of course, neutral, but in a certain way it was not so heavily charged by these two specific moments that have really changed that scenario and villages like that in Portugal.
I'm not sure if at that moment you have been a member of that punk band already, or if it was later.
I was
but
10 years old.
So early punker. So it came later, but I guess it was not very typical for a life of a teenager in a village to become the member of a punk band. Was it a form of revolt, a form of protest?
Of course. I was. My teenager years were hitting on me very hard, and I needed to speak for myself, and I needed to, I needed to stand up in a certain way, and back then that was very unusual. I mean, when I sometimes I think, 30 years have passed, more or less, but it's incredible the changes. Like, for example, you walk around the street and it's so easy and common to see someone with the hair dyed green, but back then it was like, wow, and especially in Portugal, and especially in the interior of Portugal, it was incredibly provocative. But I feel that was also part of a major thing that actually led me to writing, because as I said before, I was already dreaming about the world and about other realities, and to have that. To put myself in that place of being different from everybody else there was also a way of trying to find an identity, of trying to stand out a bit. I don't know.
Why did you quit your ambitions as a musician?
Because I was never good anyway, but also. I don't know. I have never really considered myself a musician. That was never part of my identity. And so, I mean, when I look back, I find it incredibly unbelievable that we got to put together a band of hardcore punk in that village actually in the end of the 80s.
Kind of revolution as well.
No, it's incredible. Actually, a few years ago, I was in an event like this in Portugal, and I met someone who is a huge collector of tapes and things of bands like that one. And I told him, probably you'd never heard of this band. And then he showed me online that there are like 3 or 4 recordings of that band, and I was really amazed because that was in a year that it's now difficult to explain to my children. For example, I have a boy of 16 and another one of 24, and for them it's impossible to explain because back then, I mean, we would record our songs with a tape recorder, playing live in front of a tape recorder. And then we would reproduce those tapes one by one and send it by mail to people. And then we would make mail fraud because we would get the stamps back and we would erase the ink of the stamp, and we would reuse those stamps again. And we would send it all over Europe, Germany, Poland, Sweden. There were like these people getting those tapes, and we were getting their tapes. And our band was called Hypochondriacos, which means hypochondriacs. And I mean, like 15 years after the band was over, I was still getting tapes and things at my mother's address at the village there. All the post offices knew that those tapes were going to that address. They could just write hypochondriacs, it would get there. If hypochondriacs galveias, that would be enough.
So in the end, it was also a base for you becoming some sort of a pop star of literature, Portuguese literature. But I would also like to speak a little bit about inspiration now and variety. And I'm really interested, Patricia, because you're an artist and a writer, how these two souls get together, how they inspire each other.
I think they don't. But I mean, I just have to live with the fact that there's different. I spent too long trying to be just one thing, and always going to places like this and getting the comment, like, for example, now you'd be presenting a book and somebody would say, "Oh, the drawings are really nice, you should draw." And then you would try to make an exhibition with drawings, and you would make comments on it and said, "Oh, the subtitles are really nice, you should write." And I spent all my time thinking, I'm always in the wrong place. I don't know what to do. I try to find a way. And then, funny enough, and today something very funny happened. I was at the breakfast room, and I met a friend I hadn't seen for 8 years, a German writer who's also tonight speaking and reading in one of the events of the book Leipzig book fair. And actually in Iowa, which was a residency, that's where we met. We both met in Iowa. It's a very known residency in the United States. And when we met, once I was asked to explain what I did and how I combined everything. And it was the first time that I realized that actually both things, or both or 3 or 4, I don't know, all these different worlds that I seem to inhabit, they could actually just live together without joining all the time, or me having to choose one of them. So I think it's more I'm interested in certain topics, and I find the tools that better fit what I want to say. And I think the world is like that. I think the world is pluridisciplinary, and life is pluridisciplinary, and we've been taught to be very specific and be more and more specialized in only one thing. But actually, as we see, life makes it difficult for us to be so just one thing. And as you see, José Luís Peixoto is a musician and a writer, and we all have multiple functions and professions and lives also. And well, I think that's.
Does that also have something to do with you living in several different places in Europe? Like the idea of getting inspiration from different places and taking something out of your, like taking your identity with you and always finding something new?
I don't know, because I think it's linked. I don't think I look for different places to live. I think it happened to me, and that's why I live in different places, and then I have to. What I want to say is, for example, the previous book, not this one, but the previous one. Well, this one also, but it's called Working Days, and so it's 7 days a week, and it's a story for each day. And when I finished it, I realized that I could have not written it if I had not lived in different places and in different countries. And for example, now I'm living in Viseu, which is, and I realized I never lived in any other place in Portugal than Lisbon, but I have lived in many European cities and many other countries. So it's strange that in the end I actually don't know my country as I know other places. So, but actually my experience living abroad helped me finding ways to live in Viseu, more than my experience in Lisbon, clearly.
May I ask one more question? Because I read it and I found it very interesting to have so many topics about identity, borders, and also the feeling of strangeness in it. This is also something very much connected to what you say, isn't it? Like you always try to find new places and find yourself in these places, maybe.
Yes, and always failed very well at it everywhere. So, and then I realized actually, again, the same way I was always trying to be one thing or trying to belong to a place, that actually most of us do not belong to where we live. For example, it's a myth that we all have one language, when I think 60% of the world is bilingual, or we never talk about it. Or most of the people, don't live where they were born, and nobody talks about it. So we have a norm that nobody applies to, the same way we have an idea of beauty, like we were talking in the previous talk, that nobody actually complies with, or that actually nobody fits in the idea we create for, even of countries. It's absurd. Like now, with all this, what's been happening this year, we're all talking about common Europe, and then we close the borders when there's a virus that doesn't have a passport. So, and I realized that what I was fighting against, it's actually what I should be talking about. And that's very recent in my work, if I'm honest enough. I struggled with something that, in fact, I can be the voice of. And I think that's our mission. If we can write or sing or talk or present something, it's to talk about those things that are there. I always say often that we are not writers, we are ghost writers. We kind of sense the same way what's going on, and we are the voice of what's going on that doesn't have a voice yet in other places. So we're not a ghostwriter of a political agenda, with a political agenda. We are the ghostwriters of the voiceless. We give voice to the voiceless. So all the people in between, and that's also me, I think.
I want to talk about a product of writing. José, your novel Galweias is a kind of portrait of the village you come from. You show the poorness, the backwardness of the people, but also their proud and their dignity. Is that how you remember it?
Well, it's how I remember it, if we consider that the present of that novel takes place in 1984. But I still have a strong connection with that place, even though I don't live there. But of course, I feel that distance is a very relative value. Because of course, here in Germany, since it's a much bigger country, distances are perceived in a different way. because my village is about 180 kilometers away from Lisbon. It's not that much. Of course, mentally speaking, it's a lot. There, it's a lot. But, I mean, my world is bigger now. I go there very easily, and I keep connections. But of course, also, it's how I remember it, in the sense that the reality now is very different from the way it's described in there. Because, as Patricia was saying, and as we were mentioning, after 74, there was a period of a bit of euphoria and a bit of confusion in a certain way. Then the 80s was also a moment of some hope and of some also struggles. But the 90s was a decade of incredibly euphoria and craziness in terms of money coming to Portugal, and back in the end of the 90s, we were in Portugal. We were all like convinced that we were like in the first line of Europe. Like, now we are Germany, now we are France, you know. Then, of course, in this century, we woke up to reality. But in the 90s, what happened was that all that money was coming, and that was not very positive for the interior of Portugal and for villages like the one that is described there. Because those villages, they were traditionally relying on agriculture. And agriculture, when all that money started to come, traditional agriculture was completely suspended. The traditional productions that were taking place on those areas, they stopped, because the landowners, and this region of Alentejo is a region of landowners, of people that own all the land, and only a few people own the land, and everybody else works for them. And that's why it was such a point of resistance to dictatorship, and that's why it's such a strong place that contributed to the revolution and to all that. But since those landowners were paid not to produce, then came unemployment, and with unemployment, people started moving away from there. And if you go today to those villages in the interior, they are at least half the population they had in the 80s, and everybody that stays there is, I mean, this is not an official number, but it's like 70% is over 65. And my village, for example, is 1,000 people, and every year it dies about 30 people, 40 people, and every year there are like 1 or 2 child being born. So you don't have to be a mathematician to see how that future is being built.
Are there people in Galway who could recognize in your novel? How did the people react on it in Galway?
Well, this novel, the novel is very specific. If you have the chance to be in Galway, and I strongly advise you to visit Galway, you will find all the places that are described in the novel. It's very specific, the streets, everything. And unlike the novels that I have written before that one, there are all the names also. In the first chapter, there are like over 100 names mentioned in the first chapter, and then they are spread all over the novel. But there are a lot of events in the novel that are inspired by real events that took place in Galway. But never say which ones are inspired in real events and which ones are not. I keep that as the advantage of people that live in Galveias. They are the only ones who know, because most of those events, they are public. Everybody there's no, oh, okay, this one happened to that person. Because when you live in a village with 1,000 people, you know 1,000 people, you know them all. And when someone dies, you know who died. And if you don't know a lot, you know a little.
Yeah, I think we all have to go there. Unfortunately, we have to finish now, don't we? Okay. There was one final question, if we have time for that, about your current projects, both of you. Like, if you do something about the pandemic, if you also write something like one of these pandemic novels, or if it gets into your work in one or the other way.
Posso começar. Personally, I have no intention right now of writing about the pandemics. Actually, whenever I close my eyes at night, I always hope that in the morning I will wake up and there will be no more pandemics. And so once it's over, I never want to remember it. I never want to think about it. I just want to forget that there was ever a pandemic in this planet. So I don't think I will write about pandemics. Regarding my current projects, actually a bit starting from that novel, which is very specific for me because that name is very specific for me. Even though here in Germany nobody knows Galveias, the word Galveias means a lot to me, and it led me to be specific. And after 2019, I wrote a novel that had this thing that was very important for me, that was the fact that it has José Saramago as main character. And José Saramago, of course, is very strong, is very big in Portugal, is a very recognized author, got the Nobel Prize. I also got the award with his name in 2001. I had the chance to meet him, and that was quite a challenge for me. And then a few months ago, I published a novel that I wrote based on the memories of a gentleman in Portugal who is 90 years old. And I have interviewed him and talked with him a lot, and I wrote this novel that is fiction, but is based on his life and on his memories. And that's what I'm working on right now, is going into these very specific things, because as Patricia was saying, there is not a real frontier between arts, and there is not a real frontier also between fiction and non-fiction. Actually, there are no frontiers, I believe. If you go there with a microscope, you just see that there is no difference between here and here, even though they put a line in the middle.
Yeah. It's not easy then. But I just launched a book last week. So I think that it's still considered a new project. It's still very fresh, and it's also the first. It's not the first, but it's one of the. While the working days was finished here in Berlin, in the residency, in the literary residency of Instituto Camões of Berlin. But it was. I had the chance to do readings, to test it. One of the chapters was published before. So there was a kind of relationship with the book before it was really turned into a book. I mean, a relationship with the audience, with the readers. This one was locked in my head for, I don't know, 5-6 years. And I think once it was in my hands in paper and with pages and a cover and all, I realized that in total 3 people had read it, which is quite scary for someone who always performs and uses his writing first in other formats before it gets to a book. So it's a very special book for me. It's called Eifen. I think it's... Yeah? It's this little thing between words, when words... in Portuguese, a lot of the times when we join two words together, we don't put them together, we put something in between. So it's about actually what José Luís was saying, is about everything that is in between. And it's about a kind of fictional place called Flandia, which is very perfect, with very specific borders. So this world has a lot of conditions and social security and common regions that get along and do treaties in between them and literary things and so on. And it's all very perfect until the day children start to fall asleep for no specific reason. And they never wake up. And one by one, they fall asleep. So you never know, like you were saying, I want to wake up and the pandemic is gone. In this case, you don't want children to go to sleep because you don't know if they don't wake up the next day. So it's a kind of a thriller. And it's about Europe, and it's about all these things that we've been talking about, because I was listening to José Luís Peixoto, and it's like, yes, we had a promise in 74. We go, when the party's slowing down, we have 1986. Oh, now we're European, great, another promise. And we keep on going from promise to promise. And now we also had this European incredible promise. And then we realized that actually, when we have the first problem, you know, borders come back, rivalry comes back, ethics work differently depending on which country and what's, you know, if there's oil or diamonds or money or resources. And so it's about that. And so once you have, what do we do when we have all the conditions and we still manage not to be happy? So it's my last novel. So it's still, I feel it's still going on, even if it's already published. And it was based, maybe it's interesting to know, in a news that I read from some years ago about refugees that came to Sweden. So it's a news, so it's a true story. Whatever that means in news, but it's a very specific case that I tried to investigate. So just to be very brief, these children were waiting to get an official asylum. There were asylum seekers coming from Syria, coming from a lot of other countries. They were like 8, 9, 10 years old, and then suddenly 3 years later, 4 years later, they already had a family, they already had a school, they already learned the language, and it was decided they were not allowed a Swedish nationality or citizenship, not nationality. And before they could be sent away, they fell asleep, and nobody could wake them up, and that's where it's based on. Yeah,
I think unfortunately we can't go deeper in it now. We really have to come to an end, but I thank you very much, you both, that you were here as well, and I hope we could continue this maybe next year at the book fair with Portugal as a guest of honor. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we look. Danke fürs Zuschauen und Zuhören. Schönen Abend noch an alle.